Yeah, I'm excited for this because after hearing from a lot of the technologists and the big companies looking to deploy robotics, I'm sure your minds are percolating about investment opportunities and kind of what the landscape looks like. So we're going to have that conversation about what are the areas which you guys are excited about, not so excited about. But before we do that, I think let's set some context and hear from each one of you. Introduce yourself and then very briefly tell what your kind of investment focus is.
So I'm Brian Frank. I'm the general partner of FTW Ventures. We're an early stage food and agricultural technology investor. We invest in hard tech that's going to disrupt or reinvent our food system. Before this, I was 3 years an angel investor in food technology. So I'm a advisor, small investor in places like Dishcraft, who you heard about earlier, and have advised or helped a number of the other companies that you've seen kind of come through here over the past several hours. And my thesis really is simple. Our food system is under attack from climate change, a growing population, a need to feed people better food. And technology has reinvented every other industry in the world. Why can't we do that with food and agriculture to make better food for healthier outcomes for people?
Great. Avidan?
So my name is Avidan Ross. I'm the founding partner of Root Ventures. We're a seed stage hard tech fund based here in San Francisco. When I say hard tech, I actually mean like hard as in difficult, not hard as in hardware. It just so happens hardware is really, really difficult. Hardware is hard. So we end up investing in a lot of things that range from industrial automation to robotics, AI, machine learning, frontier software for unloved industries. And I have a personal passion for food automation, so I actually used to work for the Food Network. I built robotics for the Food Network, but unfortunately the robots that we built incinerated my co-host's eyebrows on camera and was deemed a liability by the network, so it never made it to air. But I have a personal passion for food automation. We were the earliest investors in a Creator or Momentum Machines. It was so long ago. Are we still Momentum Machines? Or no, Creator. All right, Creator. It's like, it's
Get on brand,
you're in the
Avidan.
know. It's throwback. It's like I remember when our jerseys were kind of ugly and the shorts were short and all that, back in the day stuff.
You were in before it was cool.
Yeah, before it was cool. But we go after really big industries, and agriculture and food are one of them. So we've made quite a few investments in that space, and always looking for next opportunities to just change the world one meal at a time.
Can you hear me? Is it on? All right. Okay. You have to actually turn it on. Hardware is hard. So partner at Better Food Ventures. We invest in agriculture technology, food technology. Our thesis is you're kind of focused on IT enabling a stronger, better food system. We have an impact lens, but that is kind of one of the data points that we look at in terms of our investments. Where's the positive impact? Where's the negative impact? And how do we strengthen the food system? So actually, we are an investor in Bite Foods, but generally less kind of more asset-light investments. So we spend a lot of time looking at this space and understanding it, but we're usually early stage, smaller bite, no pun intended, and so we're looking to make our money go as far as it can. So usually asset-light investments.
I'm Rajat Bhageria. I run a new early stage fund called Prototype Capital. Our essential belief is that a lot of the industries that we're really going to see be revolutionized by technology in the next 50 to 100 years, they're going to be the old industries. It's going to be manufacturing, food and beverage, insurance, finance, right? Like the old industries, right? And a lot of people who understand the old industries, well, they're not just in here. They're not just in Silicon Valley. They're not just in LA. They're not just in New York. They're in Cincinnati. They're in Chicago. They're in Atlanta. They're in Philadelphia. They're all over the place. And frankly, the Silicon Valley guys, investors, they're not really looking there, right? And so our argument is, okay, how do you find these awesome under-the-radar companies, right? And what we came up with is founders. Love hanging out with other founders. As a founder, most of my friends are founders. Those are the people I naturally am attracted to. Those are the people I grab dinner with and drinks with, right? And so we have 50 scouts out of the country. These are all kind of awesome founders building their own company in whatever space it may be, and they kind of refer us deals. So, a lot, we've done a couple of deals in food and beverage. Kiwi was one of them. And I am actually running my own kind of food robotics company as well. So that's a stealth company. So hopefully next year we'll get into the weeds there.
Great. Well, I'd love to hear from one of you or each of you about we've heard a lot about different types of food robotics, a lot of startups. You guys are all seem fairly early stage, and in a lot of these experimental areas, I'd be interested to hear what you evaluate a company on, because we can see the opportunity. It's always easy to say, okay, food you can disrupt. That's great, but there's so much competition. There's so many big companies in the space. In a fairly unproven area, how do you evaluate an opportunity? Is it team? Is it just concept? Is it it's a white space? I'd love to hear, what are your criteria for in evaluating these opportunities in food robotics?
I can start off. So I think the number one most important thing in any early stage venture is always the people. And so you have to see kind of an amazing team that has done something kind of disruptive in the past or has the potential to do something disruptive. So you're looking for people that have some innate knowledge that is going to change something about the world. And they know it, or they have the ability to execute on it. Those are two really important things for me, which is, it's great if you know it. It's great if you know how the world's going to change. But if you've never or can't understand how to execute on it, that's the 99.9% of the work is actually execution, not the idea. And then I would say the two other things that we look for are obviously market potential. So if you talk to any VC here on this panel, we have certain amounts of returns that we have to make on our capital. And so we're looking for companies that exit at a certain rate or time or value. And so we have to see a big market opportunity for which that they can scale into. The final thing I always say is it's an unfair advantage. It's something that this team uniquely knows or has access to, or is IP, that sets them farther ahead on the path to getting there than anybody else I see. Because I will say, there was one point, I think, and Avidan knows this, I looked at 3 or 4 strawberry picking robots. And I think we had this discussion where it's
I picked the right one.
Yeah, he accidentally probably picked the right one, but we don't know yet. Too early. But you look at 3 or 4 teams that are doing exactly the same thing, and you go, what sets one apart? Because ideas are pretty cheap, and then it becomes, do they know something, or can they execute better than anybody else there?
All right, we're going contrarian. Brian, you're wrong.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding. You're actually right on most of that stuff.
That's a typical VC trope, by the way.
No. But I would push a little bit on market knowledge, right? I think this is one of the things that's really difficult about getting into food automation is who has eaten at a restaurant in the last 7 days? Who has eaten at a restaurant today? Who has eaten at a restaurant multiple times in the last 7 days? So we all think we understand restaurants. And we all walk in saying, I know how Sweet Greens runs. I know how Burger King runs. I know how I actually, I might have even worked there during high school, right? But to really understand is another level. To actually understand the operations of a restaurant is not, flipping burgers for a semester in high school, right? It's having, for Alex, it was perfectly the example. His family was running burger chains, so he was seeing it from the inside. And I think that it's really hard. We would rather you're either one or the other. You're either deeply embedded in restaurants and you understand it fully, or you admit you don't know anything. And you say, I have a desire to change this industry because I understand objectively something is wrong here, but my competitive advantage is I understand the solution. I understand how to build robotics. I have grit to barrel through the problems around mechanical, electrical, software, all the really complex parts of this. And I'm not going to delude myself to believe that I understand exactly how a restaurant should run. I'm going to actually go lean on people who are already experts in that space and go and talk to them and say, I know what's possible. I know what can be built, what's technically possible. But I want to better understand how you think about, fast food versus QSR versus the experience somebody has when they walk into a restaurant versus what they expect on delivery. I think to your point, absolutely size matters. So we have about 125 million in our funds. So we have to see some pretty serious upside. Thankfully, food is a really freaking big industry, right? If we're in agriculture, we're in synthetic meats, we're in restaurant operations, we're full stack. But every single one of those, it is never a struggle to see a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. It's just a really complex business.
Let's hone in on team a little bit. And Brita, you could take this one if you want. So you talked about how you think market knowledge is important, but either or, Avidan. But Ali Buzari earlier talked about how he wants early on to have someone who has culinary experience. So you don't kind of go down that path, because we're kind of in a frothy environment around food investment, food tech investment, it seems, in the Valley. And so it seems like there's a lot of business plans probably landing on your desk, some of them probably crazy. So is it good to have someone who is knowledgeable about culinary or whatever market you're going into early on, even if you have like a tech guy as well?
Look, I think understanding the food system to some extent is very important. So we have a lot of pitches where it's pure technologists who are not wise enough to recognize that they don't understand. Like to your point, they have eaten at a restaurant many times in the last 7 days, and so they do think they're an expert, and they're not wise enough to recognize that they don't understand the inner workings. So I see that a lot where you just have a lot of really excited, passionate technologists. In the restaurant, grocery, kind of media, personalized nutrition. You're seeing this across the board. With people who really see how technology can, create a quote unquote solution to maybe something that's not a problem. So we've all seen that, where there's products that exist for the sake of existing that are actually not solving a pain point. And one thing in terms of how we think about an exit is. Is there, I think for the way that our lens through kind of where the opportunities as investors are, most of these are going to be M&A exits. There's not a lot of IPOs in, the categories that we're looking at. So, understanding, is there a true path to, a strategic acquire, understanding and, ponying up to, pay money for this company. And so that's where you get into the lens of, is this going to be a need to have in the future or a nice to have? And so I've seen, a lot of times where there's really cool technology and really compelling ways that, kind of earlier stage companies could fit into a strategic acquirer's business or, kind of portfolio, but it's a nice to have, not a need to have. And, with the margins that exist in the food business, a nice to have, you just can't get, these strategic acquirers usually kind of over that hump of taking out their checkbook and writing a compelling multiple for companies that don't actually solve a true problem. So that's maybe I went on a little bit of a tangent, but I think I've also seen a lot of kind of hardcore nutritionists or hardcore chefs or hardcore restaurateurs who don't understand technology enough or the challenges in actually scaling. So to Brian's point. You're looking for a big opportunity, but what you didn't emphasize, but what you said is, technologies that can scale. And it's really hard to scale in food because, food is totally different than, kind of any other, kind of software-driven or hardware-driven technology. You have perishables, you have, people components, you have regular habits of how people eat and consume and think about food, and all of that makes it. You have these crazy analog, kind of messy middleware that there is no digital infrastructure. So all these things make it really difficult to scale. So I think that's one lens. If you don't understand that, then that's one of the things that I immediately look for is, do you understand what it actually takes to scale in this industry?
What I like about food tech and food robotics even more so is the early stage of it, right? It feels a little bit like homebrew computer club era, right? Like it's so early. There's no common operating system. I mean, there might be some, but generally, like there's no kind of common stack. Everyone's using different technologies that largely don't interoperate. So it's an exciting time because it's messy. And so, is that an exciting time as an investor? Like in terms of like, okay, it's so early that you can get in early versus like one of those more mature markets where you kind of see a more kind of true and kind of beaten path to the marketplace?
Well, I'd push back on that a little bit. I've been watching the TV show Good Eats. I don't know if you remember that show. Mark Summers, like I don't know, he's like Double Dare or TV Funhouse or something like that, and he like had this amazing show where you take tours of automated food production facilities, right? So like we've been automating food since 1990. I mean, whenever he started showing up at these facilities, I'm sure they were automated before. I think what's interesting now is that we've been able to move into chaotic, unstructured environments of the endpoint. Right, so like I'm.
So it's an era, though, right? Because there were mainframes in the 50s, right?
Exactly.
But now we're like there was.
Now you have it mobile, right? And so now it's gone mobile, and that's what I think is where it's compelling, right? So the idea that the smartphone wars had led to the peace dividends of like IoT. I think the largest opportunity in food robotics is actually coming from the autonomous car. because the autonomous car forced intelligent systems to work in hyper unstructured, chaotic environments, which is what food is. I mean, a tomato shows up. A tomato looks different every single time. It is not. It doesn't fit in the box. And so what a lot of centralized systems are able to do is be the mainframe. And I think the really interesting opportunity that exists today comes from the peace dividends of the autonomous car wars, where you have low-cost LiDAR, cameras, GPUs, the ability to process a lot of complex information and make decisions on the fly.
And associated open source kind of machine learning projects.
Right. I mean, you put TensorFlow, you can use Google's TensorFlow to like look at your sandwiches or look at your pizza and make sure that you did it right. And like no one would have guessed when they were working on the autonomous car that they were going to help pizza, right?
It's almost like the difference between like automation and autonomy. Like automation's been around for hundreds of years. Maybe not hundreds, but like at least 100, right? Like the loom, right? Like the Ford production line, right? This is all automation, right? And like we've been making millions of frozen pizzas every single year, but that's automation. It's doing the same thing over and over. There's no machine learning. There's no thinking. It's just do it, right? And I think to Avidan's point, right? Like that's really what we're seeing in all these things, right? And maybe it's not LiDAR, right? Like for example, Kiwi does not use LiDAR. It's all vision-based stuff, right? Like, but I think the invention of like, in my head, right? Like computer vision is like absurdly important here, right? Because before, the problem with really analyzing data was just data transfer, right? Like you had to type information in. And so getting information into a computer is absurdly hard. So, but now instantly you can take a picture or a video stream and you can instantly get millions of bits of information, right? And now you have really good GPUs to make sense of it, and you have even better algorithms like TensorFlow and deep neural nets to analyze it, right? So you have better sensors with cameras, cheaper sensors. You have better computation with GPUs and cloud computing and deep neural nets, and you have cheaper actuation, right? So you have all three, right? Better sensors, better computation, and better actuation, which means you can do a lot of unstructured stuff, which I think that's the new stuff. It's not making frozen pizzas over and over. It's making different things in really weird situations over and over.
But that democratization leads to basically anybody can do just about anything. Because if you can go get a camera from a Chinese manufacturer, slap it on a rig that has some kind of driving capability, and you get a couple little LiDARs and things like that, like all this stuff is making it easier for more people to get started. The question is, does it make better products or does it make better companies? And I think that's where, like Avidan could probably do a teardown of any product right now and say where you got your components and who you're buying it from, and could anybody else get into that supply chain and stuff like that before he does an investment decision. I can't do that yet. I aspire to be the level of Avidan, to be honest with you, with these teardowns. But the reality is that technology now is democratized, and so when you look at, okay, whose hands are it in? What problem is it solving? I go like, the technology's not the thing. It's the thing that gets you to the thing. What is that problem you're trying to solve with the technology? Because everybody has exactly the same access to all that hardware and capabilities. Unless you're designing a new chip, or unless you're designing a new sensor, or things like that, it's all democratized. So that makes it messier for us, because then we have to really sort through, okay, everybody has it, who's going to be the one that actually commercializes it?
Which is why I think everything's open source, right? And so really what it comes down to is like who has access to better data. I mean, this is true of like entirety of tech, but who has access to better data and who has more domain level expertise, right? Whoever has more of that wins.
We've talked about I also talk about the democratization of all these tools and access, but robotics feels special and different, and it's so much harder because it's not just like we look at it for IoT. Every time we see an IoT, I'm actually no longer the expert at Root Ventures. My partner Chrissy, she was the EPM on the iPod and Apple Watch, and she's manufactured more product than anyone living in the United States today. I mean, she can tear it down, and she will tell you why it's commodity, and she'll tell you exactly where you could save 10% on your BOM. But the difference is the solution you're providing, and I think the complexity of the food system. Anyone who's worked in a restaurant realizes there are a lot of people involved, and a lot of people are making a lot of decisions to get a very basic meal out there. And I think that in order to get a robotic system to hit parity with the expectations of a consumer when they walk into the average QSR is really high. And we need to do better than that. Because fundamentally, the expectation of the consumer is that robots are going to make them a better quality product, right? People walk into Creator and they end up getting the best burger in the city, period, at any price. And then you throw it $6 and they're like, oh, robots, amazing. it took a very long time and a lot of manpower to build that product, right? It is not an overnight, like, democratize, just grab a couple robot arms, throw them on a grill, and like say like, okay, watch what that person does, and then robot, you do it now. And like, we think that that's the way it should work because we've been told that like it's now accessible, and it just doesn't work that way. These things are really, really hard. So what I would say is, if you're going down this path, do not underestimate the complexity of what you're going after. Remember, you need to hit a very high bar because consumers want a lot. They want the Apple version of their meal, and that it's okay that it's going to take time. It's okay that you are going to need to recruit a lot of people to work on it, but like, go after the big thing. Don't just like roll out a prototype and say like, cool, a robot arm that can make the thing and wave at you and you take a picture and the game is over. And like, now we have restaurants, go ahead and scale. Like, it's worth the effort, I think. And that might just be my take though.
It's a great take. I do want to save a little bit of time for questions in the audience, if there are some questions. To that point, I kind of want to keep harping on that a little bit, or talk about it. So democratization of technology allows someone kind of go in the garage and create cool things, but it does seem like this is a capital-intensive business as well, right? So to scale up to production to make thousands of hamburgers or pizzas or whatever, like that takes capital. So is this like a scenario where it either takes like millions or tens of millions of dollars investment, or partnerships with big corporates that are doing high volume food in some scenarios? Does it require one or the other?
So yeah, I mean, so like I said, we're capital efficient investors. So that's exactly why we're generally not investing in this space, is because it does take a lot of money and it takes a long time. And to your point, it's okay that it's going to take a long time. Yes, it's okay that it's going to take a long time, but then you have to have investors, behind you for the long haul. So, I mean, I think that does speak to, this is a little bit of a tangent, but, the quality of investors and, kind of looking for investors that do have experience in this space, that do understand it is going to be a long time, because if you're looking for, traditional tech investors that are excited about a new shiny object, they're not necessarily in it for the long haul with you.
Couple of thoughts here. So one is that I think, the size of the bomb is definitely important, right? So like, one reason we took the Kiwi bet is because their bomb is like at least 20 times smaller than all the other competition, right? So if you can make a robot for like absurdly cheap, right? Like, you only have to do a certain amount of deliveries for that return on capital to be super fast, right? Whereas if you have a $50,000, $100,000 robot with LiDAR and all custom hardware and everything's like the best NVIDIA processor, everything, it's just really expensive, right? Where if you use simple stuff, you can get out there, you can get a brand, you can start collecting data to make your neural nets better, right? So one idea is just like have a very cheap bomb. But second idea, I think is more generalizable, right? I think if you look back at the solar industry and photovoltaics, right? Like, a lot of the innovation in the last 10 to 20 years has really been around financing, right? Like, a lot of the innovation that Solar City, I guess now Tesla and Sunrun really did was, how do you make this thing cheaper? Where the value proposition is obvious. Like, once you have these installed, it's, you're not spending any money on electricity, but you have to pay $30,000 up front. Well, most people can't pay $30,000 up front. So automation is the same thing. Once you apply this, it's 50%, 60%, 80% cost reductions. But how do you pay the X dollars up front? Well, I think a lot of the innovation that companies will have to do, startups will have to do, is figuring out the financing. It's not like, technology is hard, right? Of course, but it's financing as well, right? And I think there's going to be some interesting things we have to kind of like say, okay, well, instead of charging $500,000 up front, you charge $10,000 or $20,000 up front, and then you amortize the rest of the cost, and then you say, okay, you only have to pay for what you use, like cloud computing. And if you can just say, hey, per month you're only paying 30% of what you currently use, well, now that's very easy to say, whereas saying, give me $1 million up front, that's really hard to say, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of innovation in financing to make automation and autonomy really possible.
I'm going to take a contrarian approach because I like talking about contrarian things like Avidan.
I'm glad you're taking it, because otherwise
I think it's expensive if you make it expensive. And so I think the reality is, a business like, and we're going to pick on our favorite guys back there in Creator, it takes a lot of money to fucking build a restaurant, right? Like, you're building the robot, plus you're building a brand, plus you're getting great high quality food, plus you're hiring the best talent. Like, that's an expensive business to build, but the returns can be really, really high, right? If you take that bet. Now, slide down the scale. Pizza used to have restaurants. They decided they didn't want to build restaurants. So they went back into B2B hardware and services and things like that. That's not as expensive as to build because they're not spending all this money on brand building and hiring front of house people or people that understand the restaurant industry. They don't have to do that. They offload that to their customers who then have to spend on top of them to build that. And then take that even farther. And I'll give Avidan props just because I love, bowing down to him. It's the only time you're going to get it, man. So enjoy it. Particle. One of Avidan's, it's a component that goes into a broader set of things, and so you can build those components, the picks and shovels, cheaper, and then sell them to someone else upstream that then has to take it the far way through. So in my mind, there's markets at all of those different levels, and you just have to decide who your customers are, what you want to build, and how many of those customers are out there.
Yeah, so you're basically laying out the horizontal versus verticalized, and I think it's again one of those things. You'll notice in all the descriptions of the things that you were saying, we're either all in on creator or we're all in on particle, right? So our take was, particle is going to be powering they're the largest professional IoT platform, bigger than Amazon, Microsoft, and GE combined in terms of developers, right? It is the largest, but it's across every industry. And I worry about being a services provider into a vertical because, when you think about it, I don't want to use Eats as an example, but a equipment provider who is selling themselves to multiple customers is basically running into an issue where a good piece of the upside is being shared. And they can't work with unlimited players, right? Burger King, Carl's Jr., and McDonald's are not all going to use the same robotics player. So that means if you are the robotics player, you cannot sell to all three. And then the question starts to become, is there a generalizable technology stack that can work for all different types of food? And it gets really hard after the point of sale and a couple other things. It's what are you going to do for the pizza guys that you're also going to do for the folks who are trying to innovate on rolling a burrito? By the way, if anyone can roll a burrito with a robot, I want to talk to you. All in. That one's hard. But I think that I think you're right. Your question is where you are in the stack, and there's a lot of risk involved. We choose to take the disproportionate risk. We choose to say, when we were out raising our most recent fund, we just went to everyone and said, we need more money and more time because these things are really difficult, but it's worth it.
I disagree on the equipment for restaurants, hospitality, food service in general, just because we're looking at multi-billion-dollar industries and things like POS.
But POS is generalized, right? That works for everyone. Restaurants and bike shops.
But that's what I'm saying is you don't have to do specified for someone's one situation. That's
but POS is also not a zero-sum game. I mean, in the same way, look at all these, don't look at the food industry, look at the car industry, right? There's never going to be just one brand of car, and that's the same for POS. You're never going to get to the one POS that every restaurant uses. What?
You're never going to get one that rules them all.
No, definitely. And so, I mean, I think it is a big enough industry that it's never going to be a zero-sum game on the one robotics player for the restaurant industry. There's not going to be the one delivery provider for the restaurant industry.
I think everyone's trying to do the industrial robot arm solution, right? They're we're going to make a robot arm for restaurants. And I'm sorry if anyone's using a robot arm for restaurants right now, but we're having a really hard time wrapping our heads around anything more than a proof of concept because robots are great for system integration, right? You're going to move something from here to there, or you're going to do the exact same thing over and over and over. And eventually you get to a point where you're well, maybe we should just build a purpose-built robot for this thing. And that's how Costco makes pizza. And Costco makes a lot of pizza with an almost automated system that they've been using for 15 years, 20 years. The pizza's okay. It's not great, but it's repeatable, and they were willing to make the investment with a partner, by the way, right? It's not their machine. So I think that's to your point. They could probably sell it to all the pizza joints. So now I changed my mind, Brian. You're right.
Damn it! Finally, I convinced him of something.
This is the type of panel I love at the end of the day. I just let you guys go. But does anyone have any questions for these guys? We have time for one or two questions.
So the question there is, there's a lot of things that go into being a food-related robotics automation business. Time, money, effort are one aspect, but there's so many other things that you need to account for in these businesses. I wholeheartedly agree. And that creates so many opportunities. Like, one of the things that we tout is pathogen detection, right? Which is, we are managing food, and so watching this stuff so it doesn't get people sick is actually a big deal. And so how do you spend more time and energy worrying about that problem? And most companies, and this is sad, most companies in the food industry only worry after it happens, right? And they do risk assessment. You know, how much is it going to take for us to recall that? What's the hit to our publicity and things like that? If you look at Chipotle, they lost, was it $6 billion off their market cap for 24 illnesses, didn't kill anybody. 24 illnesses, and I'm not downplaying that. I'm just saying, like, this is the impact to a business. And yet we still don't apply good technology in those infrastructure. And so we as investors have to look at why, and is there a big enough opportunity, and is someone willing to pay $1 for that preventativeness? And so I agree with you. I'm trying to find some of those sectors where that spend happens.
Yeah, food safety is scary for me. I mean, like, part of the reason we invested in Creator at the time was not called Creator, but back then we did a bunch of diligence and we looked at food safety in the hamburger in the fast food industry, and it was abysmal. It was like not even abysmal. It was disgusting. I wouldn't eat. I don't think I've eaten a fast food. That's not true. I've eaten a fast food burger since then. I haven't eaten many fast food burgers since then. I minimized it because the realization I had was that we weren't able to train staff to wash their hands. I'm sorry if anyone plans to go to McDonald's after this, you are about to be disgusted. But like, people weren't washing their hands often enough because they were being retrained every Monday. And like, in order to get sanitized, like, the pathogen problem in a fast food joint was terrible. People weren't wearing gloves. People were not washing their hands properly. And the realization was, well, why don't we just sanitize the food? And we have a lot of sanitized food in the United States for this reason. And that's disgusting. I mean, like, that is not how we should be eating. Instead, we should be controlling the last 24 hours of production in an efficient fashion so that people can eat real food. They can eat real food that's properly prepared and prepared in a way that the nutrients are still there for you. I mean, this is like epidemic level stuff. I just came from Mexico, eating in like the cities of Mexico, and I'm telling you, like, everyone's like, you're gonna get sick. I was like, I actually saw like meat, like refrigerated, like I actually saw the food products being prepared for me. And there are so many places where people are eating today in the United States where they have no idea what they are putting in their mouths. And I think that automation and restaurants that are moving production to front of house, right? I think I see a Sweet Greens hat. I think that is very much the future, right? It is like, be in touch with what you're eating, be aware of what you're eating, and whether it's being prepared by a human or a robot is not really the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is, if we're going to have a population of people who are eating normal foods and are not a weight on our medical system, we need to do something about it. And it's automation up and down the stack is the way that I believe we'll be able to feed the next generation. So it's a worthwhile effort, but like that pathogen, like safe food, I think is what leads people to end up making unhealthy food rather than taking the opposite approach.
Well, we're about at time. If you can take the questions afterwards, you guys hopefully can stay up here and answer a few questions. But actually, I'm going to ask you guys to give them a big round of applause.